All right, awesome. Well, welcome.
Thank
Um,
you.
I'm going to give a quick intro for our guest. My name is Miriam. I'm the project manager here at JTC. This is Dr. Mary Twis. She is a faculty of social work at Texas Christian University, where her research interests span modern needs, centering the study of sex trafficking in modern times and anti-Semitism in social work, among other timely subjects. Outside of work, Mary enjoys being a Jewish mom to her four daughters. She's raising them globally with her husband as they split time between Texas and Israel. She joins us today to share about her research, her life, and her aspirations for social work and Jewish visibility and inclusion in that field. So, just a little bit of logistics. We're going to spend about half an hour discussing your research and kind of your perspectives on the field of social work, what's going wrong, how to mend it, how JTC and other people can help. And then we're also going to get to know Mary and her life and being a Jewish academic. So that is our intro. Welcome. I feel like a
Yeah.
podcast host right now.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's great.
um, yeah, I know I just gave you a little quick intro, but if you want to say a few things about yourself and sort of your path.
Yeah, so I think you did it well. I'm a faculty member at TCU. I'm on sabbatical this year and using this year to do some teaching at a university in Montana and also doing a little bit more traveling, which I love to do. It's complicated because I do have kids, and so it's figuring out how to shuffle things around and make sure that they have what they need in school is sometimes a challenge. But yeah, that's what I'm doing this year and spending the year really finishing up and starting some new projects that are energizing to me.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, towards the end, we'll get a little bit more into sort of the specific research focuses that you have during this past sabbatical year. But if you could just tell us a little bit about how you got into academia and what it feels like for you to be Jewish in academia right now.
Yeah. So I got into academia a little bit by accident. So kind of going back into my history, when I was finishing my master's degree, I told myself, hey, I would love to go back and get a PhD. But instead, I went straight into the field and I worked for about 5 years as an LMSW. I worked in healthcare systems and I worked as a case manager with women who had been trafficked or commercially sexually exploited. And it was like in 2015. I had a crisis. I was a single mom at the time, and I lost half my income because one of my contracts that I was working on had gone away. And so, not really knowing what else to do, I said maybe now's the time to go back and get my PhD without a clear plan for how I was going to use that or what to do next. But then when I got into the PhD, I realized I really loved it, and so that's how I ended up in academia. The second part of your question was about what's it like to be a Jewish faculty member. I also kind of ended up in this, I guess, um, life by accident because I converted to Judaism, and I converted to Judaism after meeting my Jewish husband in 2016. And though he never asked me to convert, I decided to on my own because I hadn't found a home in my faith tradition in quite a long time. And so I happily made the decision to convert for like out of respect for Judaism and its traditions, and also for family cohesion as we started to welcome children into our home. So I
Right.
converted in 2018. And at the time, and I've written
Congratulations.
about this, I didn't fully know, like, of course, I studied for a long time in order to do the conversion, but I didn't really fully know, like, the fullness of what I was stepping into in this life. And so some of it has been really surprising to me. I remember feeling surprised for the first time in 2021 when there was a 11-day war between Israel and Hamas, and I just saw this growth in anti-Semitism from friends of mine who had been in my MSW program or who had been in my PhD program with me. And I felt so shocked by this and tried to understand where it was coming from. And then it felt like it went away until 2023. And so I think like a lot of my time in academia has been figuring out what this is and how to navigate around this and try to understand where this is even coming from in a field where I thought that we all kind of had the same ground that we stood on about advancing human rights for all. And I felt like that isn't applied as it should be for certain populations, including Jewish populations.
Yeah, so you did your LMSW before you converted and then after
Yeah.
you had converted. Was there
Yeah.
did you notice a big difference in sort of how you approached the work or how you approached your peers or anything like that?
Not at first. I mean, I think that I'm very different now than I was. But at first, I kind of felt like, oh, this is giving me a new paradigm with which to engage with my spirituality. It's making me feel welcome again in a faith tradition. It's providing me a lot of really good anchors for which to raise my kids and to build our marriage. It was doing all those things for me. But that felt kind of organic. But I think like now. Yeah, I think I do engage differently with the field than I used to. And I don't know that I have a good like snippet to explain where that's coming from. I just think like my sense of justice has evolved a little bit, probably as a result of my understanding of Jewish thought and tradition.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I um also very interesting that it sounds like you did have sort of a faith tradition before, and I'm sure that you already approached your work from that specific angle, and once you converted that you probably had a similarly meaningful but just sort of different angle on that.
Right. Yeah, yeah, different. I know from going through my conversion process and working with many folks from different walks of life that it might not be unusual for somebody who is brought up in Jewish tradition to have some, maybe even a complicated relationship with their faith. I definitely had that from my previous faith tradition, but I don't feel like I have that in the Jewish tradition that I'm in now.
Right. Nice.
Yeah, if that
Thank you
makes
for
sense.
that. Yeah, yeah. No,
Uh,
it's definitely um as someone who has a lot of non-Jewish friends and some of them who have strongly held faith, other faith traditions, it's definitely interesting to see how it's individual, but also I do see kind of patterns among different faith traditions and how people tend to interact with them and experience them.
mhm. Yeah,
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, I'm going to do my best to ask this in the best way possible because let me tell you, I got a BA in psychology, and that's where my current education level is in terms of the field. So I'm going to ask questions. Please feel free to correct or further explain anything.
sure.
Um, so speaking about sort of binaries and the way in which, especially social work, approaches almost these ethical considerations of what the work looks like, what frameworks we use. Is there anything that you would like to share about your experiences or your learning as a PhD candidate when it comes to binaries?
Yeah, so if I'm interpreting the question correctly, so what I think you're probably referring to is like the oppressor and oppressed binary. Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah.
So yeah, I have written about this in a number of my articles where and other people have written about this too. It's not just me thinking this way. The oppressor and oppressed binary is one that I find to be, and I've found this to be increasingly problematic within social work. And I will say that I didn't find this to be a problematic way of viewing the world, even as recently as 3 years ago. And it was around 3 years ago that it really became in vogue in social work and in social work competencies from 2022 to talk about anti-oppressive practice in social work, right? Sounds good. And I even had some, people I worked with wrote recommendation letters for me talking about me as being an anti-oppressive social work practitioner. Okay. But after October 7th, and when I immediately, so I remember like I was about to enter maternity leave when October 7th happened, and we had just returned from Israel probably a month before or 2 months before October 7th happened. And I remember speaking with my parents about the protests against Israel that were really crossing the line into anti-Semitic rhetoric immediately after October 7th. And I remember speaking with my parents and saying, at the time, I'm not worried about social work crossing that line because social work has a code of ethics. And in our code of ethics, we have core values that speak to the dignity and worth of all humans, the importance and centrality of service and social justice to enhancing human dignity, right? Like these are core social work values. And I said, anything that crosses that line into anti-Semitic rhetoric will so clearly be in violation of core ethical standards and values within social work, especially the dignity and worth of humans, um, that I don't think it will gain traction in social work. And then, like, not but a week later, I started seeing news reports about schools of social work really advancing anti-Zionist type of rhetoric that crossed over very obviously to me and based upon my interpretation and understanding of the International Holocaust Remembrance associated, or the IHRI definition of anti-Semitism, crossed the line. And I was shocked by this and tried to understand for a long time, what is going on? Where is this coming from? And I've landed on it being something that has emanated from the oppressor and oppressed binary that is um, manufactured by the broad acceptance and uncritical application of neo-Marxist philosophy to how we understand justice. Okay, so I know that's like a huge mouthful, but what is happening when we smash together in our competencies related to, in social work related to ADEI, when we smash together ideas about mandating that students learn how to practice anti-oppressively and from a rights-based framework, we're essentially taking two philosophical trees that do not relate to one another well. So when you're talking about neo-Marxist philosophy, that really does separate the world into oppressed and oppressed binaries versus humanistic philosophy, which is the core of social work. If you look back at social work history, social work and social work philosophy is based on like just the core principles of humanistic philosophy and human rights discourse. These two different philosophical branches have incompatible understandings of what truth is and who deserves respect and dignity. So on the neo-Marxist side, there's some basic assumptions about um, how we determine who deserves rights. Okay, and that determination is based upon power analytics. The people who are powerful and oppressive are necessarily exploiting the people who are powerless and oppressed, and therefore rights and responsibilities and resources ought to be taken away from people with power and distributed to people with less. On this side, right, the humanistic philosophy side, what we're looking at is saying that there are differences in how power is felt and resources and rights are distributed, but our obligation is to confirm and affirm the human rights for all. Okay, these two assumptions, they're incompatible in many ways. There have been some attempts to try to bridge across this divide, but Jewish populations, the reason why this is so dangerous for Jewish populations is that we do not fit into the oppressed oppressor binary well. Okay, so like Jewish Americans, Jewish people have been historically marginalized and discriminated against, historically oppressed, and at the same time have often risen into positions of power and responsibility, right? Based upon demographic profiles of, the percentage of people who complete college, the percentage of people who have jobs in government or in media, right? These Jewish people fill these roles. And so we explode this binary. Like it doesn't make any sense applied to Jewish people. There's other groups for whom it certainly also doesn't make sense. This perspective that talks about emphasizing the rights for all is really more compatible with social work ethics and values. And therefore, I think that we're in a dangerous place with social work if we keep emphasizing this, using power analytics to determine who deserves rights and care. That's my long answer to your question.
Excellent. Okay. I do
Yeah.
have a couple follow-ups.
Yeah, of course.
Super well explained. So I'm wondering if you can pinpoint or have a general idea of when that sort of crossover started. I mean, obviously it seems to have accelerated a lot lately, but has that been kind of something that's been long coming, or is that something that just sprouted in the last few years?
It's been percolating for a long time. I recently wrote in an editorial, it should come out, I'm not actually sure when it will come out, but I recently wrote in an editorial that social work has recycled this conversation for many decades. There was a time in the past where, and the way I talk about it in my writing is it's a telos for social work, right? Like, what is the why of social work? And people as long ago as the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s were kind of arguing over what's the telos, the shared why of social work. And some people said it's more like neo-Marxist. It's about rights and resources distribution. And other people said, no, it's more this humanistic approach. And really, it was the humanistic approach that won out in those conversations back in the 30s to 50s. And it's such that social commentary informed by neo-Marxist thought really became subordinated to humanistic philosophy and how we're then going to approach and intervene and advocate for change. So it's been around a long time, and I have a little bit of a problem with it, but I don't have a huge problem with using these theoretical lenses like
Mhm.
decolonization, like intersectionality, like other frameworks that are informed by neo-Marxist philosophy as social commentary. Okay. But when it tips into praxis, when those forms of thought tip into, then we're going to take action on them, then it starts to be dangerous if they do not have an ethical core, which they don't because they don't believe in universal ethics for all. So that is a long-standing argument, but it became codified in the CSWE um, competencies in 2022 when there became a mandate in the CSWE competencies, especially, well, it's in all the competencies, but especially in competencies 2 and 3, you start to see specific call outs to how we must train social workers to practice from an anti-oppressive perspective. So
Okay.
now it's going to be for the programs that have already been reaffirmed under the 2022 EPAS, they already have that in their programs. And for those that are up for reaffirmation, they will increasingly lean into that kind of language.
Yeah, as sort of a kind of filling out of what was already added
Yeah,
to the. Okay, that
yeah.
makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like it was something that's kind of been in the background and discussed for a long time, and it's only in 2022 that it has been affirmed as an
It
actual
tipped into
standard.
being fully implemented in
Mhm.
social work education.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, it seems like it also kind of is part of a broader societal focus. And I know that a lot of lenses and frameworks and types of things kind of come in and out of vogue, but it seems like in the last 5 years, especially, this sort of stepping back and examining systems and paradigms and trying to take a look at sort of the broader picture has been a really big focus. And it sounds like that's sort of how that focus has emanated in the social work field as like, you've seen it everywhere, but this seems like very specific to that.
Yeah. I mean, so I will say that social work as a profession has always had an emphasis on macro systems, right? So that's kind of embedded in our professional identity, though it's not always done. And certainly there's been, and this is well documented for decades, there's kind of a hyper focus on more micro level
Mhm.
interventions, despite the fact that social work has this identity as bridging all the way from micro to macro. But I believe that's more the result of incentives, like institutional incentives, and kind of neoliberalism incentives to focus more on micro social work than on macro, rather than it is explicitly saying we don't care about macro when we only started to care in the last 5 years. No, that's not true. We've cared for a long time as a profession. It's this specific approach to macro. You can approach macro social work with humanistic perspective. You can say, I want to apply empirical knowledge to improve systems, to make sure that we're lifting the shared distribution of rights to all. You can absolutely do that from a humanistic approach. Was it being done well? I don't know. In some ways, no. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that if we're coming at it from this perspective, it's really not going to make it better at the macro level.
Mm. Just bringing in something from another perspective and not really well
Yeah.
integrating it into the existing. Yeah, that makes a lot
Mhm.
of sense.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. So shifting gears a little bit to our last sort of area of focus, we've gotten an idea of you as a person and a bit of your journey in academia, a little bit of an overview of the field of social work. And then I wanted to ask about the specific research that you're doing and how that fits into you and what's going on right now.
Yeah. So I mentioned that I started to look at this topic of anti-Semitism in social work about 2 years ago. And it was by accident, right? I didn't plan to write about this. I've been a human trafficking researcher for many years. Um, so what did though, when I started to get involved in this field was I joined a WhatsApp group with other Jewish faculty members and really learned in that course of conversation that there's not a lot of literature around the experience of anti-Semitism from Jewish Americans. There's some kind of specific studies looking at the experiences of, for instance, Israeli expats living in the US or Hasidic communities in New York, but not a whole lot that's looking at a broad sample. So I saw a large gap in the literature, specifically to look at the Jewish American experience of anti-Semitism, especially in the context of Israel and Zionism. I think there's some aversion to talk about this and to research it to better understand, like, what is this like for Jewish people that are living through this time in history. So I have a study going. I've currently interviewed about 20 Jewish Americans, all walks of life, different levels of observance. Some people who converted, most who were born Jewish, right? So like all over the US to get a broad sample so that I can understand, regardless of your level of observance, the branch of Judaism that you're in or that you're not in, if you're secular, whatever it is, what is the core experience, right? So the study is called phenomenological, which just means I'm looking at the core experience of what this is like to experience anti-Semitic attacks that are couched in phrases about Israel or Zionism. So that's what I'm doing. I'm still looking for 5 to 10 more participants for this study, hoping to wrap it up in, well, at least the data collection by mid-December. And specifically, I'm looking, because right now I've sampled, 20 folks so far. Almost all of them are women. Almost all of them are Ashkenazi. And I'm specifically looking for men, and I'm looking for people who are from like Sephardic or Mizrahi or other racial and ethnic Jewish backgrounds in order to get a more representative sample for the study.
That makes sense. Do you have ages or areas of the country or anything else like that you're looking for?
Yeah, so I actually have really good representation by age. I have decent representation by region of the country. If there's anybody who's kind of missing, it's a little bit more West Coast. So I'd be curious to hear from folks living more West Coast or Midwest as well.
Got it.
Mhm.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I'm just thinking about, you know, sort of, is this specifically looking at a time frame of like the last year, the last 5 years, or is this just across people's lives?
Yeah, so it's been across people's lives. Most of the conversation, the questions are asked in a way where most people end up talking about the last 2 years, because for many people, their first experience of like this real intensity to this anti-Semitic rhetoric that's couched in anti-Zionist
Hmm.
terms um, has been very intense for the last 2 years. I'm hearing a lot about the last 2 years, but I've also had folks talk about their whole life perspective and journey. And though many of the questions are related to um, this issue of anti-Semitism in the context of Israel and Zionism. They also just talk about, have you experienced marginalization or targeting, those kinds of things, based upon your Jewish identity. So it kind of crosses back and forth between looking at anti-Semitism
Okay.
more broadly, and then also this form that we're seeing more of lately.
That's really cool. That sounds really, really awesome.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Is there anything else that people should know? I know that you mentioned that if you're willing to talk about this, it's a pretty small one-time commitment.
Yeah, it's a one-time commitment. Yeah, that's correct. The way to actually, maybe I could show can you turn on the screen sharing? I can show my little ad.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just a one-time commitment. So folks just need to fill out an informed consent and survey. It takes about 2 minutes to do that. And then they can schedule an interview with me. And the interview lasts between 40 minutes and an hour, just kind of depending upon how much people want to talk. So I can share my screen here.
Yeah.
Essentially, if folks want to get involved, you just email me, mary.twis@tcu.edu, and I can take it from there and get you set up with the consent and the survey and then the interview.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll put that out and make sure everyone has access to it. I
Yeah.
actually have a couple more questions, and then I think
Yeah.
Sharon, we're going to open it up to a little bit more discussion, and we'll turn off the recording too. But I'm curious about what exists. You said that there's not a lot of studies specifically on Jewish Americans um, reporting anti-Semitism, that it only happens in really specific pockets. Do you have any
Mhm.
idea why that hasn't been something that's been studied? I mean, I've heard of studies on all other sorts of discrimination.
Yeah. I mean, so my understanding is that for the similar reasons that I listed before, Jewish Americans are often not considered a marginalized group because of some of the privileges that we may have experienced by nature of our demographic background, right? So, folks haven't looked at the needs of Jewish Americans the way that they have at other people. Um, and I've also understood, this is kind of anecdotal, but from learning more from other faculty members in social work, like I wasn't looking at Jewish Americans. Other folks weren't. We were looking at other vulnerable populations. And so, that's just been, the emphasis has been elsewhere.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you, I mean, do you expect this to be sort of a bigger focus as we see anti-Semitic incidents rising elsewhere? Do you think that more sort of resources and attention is going to go to this topic?
I don't know about resources. I know that a lot of people who hadn't been doing research on this are now doing research on this. So there is some more attention from faculty members, and from social workers to look at this issue. I worry that it still won't get the attention that it needs because unfortunately, and I've experienced this as well. When when I say, hey, what I'm talking to a friend or something or a colleague, hey, what you're saying right now is an anti-Semitic like blood libel, right? For instance, this has happened a lot. And I'll get feedback. No, it's not. I'm just criticizing Israel. Right. So there's a blindness to the way that anti-Semitism functions, how it functions oftentimes in a way that's different than other forms of prejudice, and therefore it gets minimized and discounted. And there was, a research study that's been very widely distributed at this point about traumatic invalidation of Jewish American experiences of anti-Semitism, and a lot of it is like this. So I hope that there'll be more attention paid to it. I don't know that there will be until we can break through this block that people have that somehow they think that um, saying, well, criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. I agree. It's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel, but there are certain ways that you talk about things that cross the line, or that are substantively intended to delegitimize, demonize an entire collective of people. And that does cross the line. But people don't want to hear it broadly.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a little bit of like a buffer or an almost like a shield of, well, I'm actually
Yeah.
doing this, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. Mhm.
Right.